the unconsciousness that we're seeing, that we spend, you go to the shops and it's just like, yep, tap and go and away. We don't really think about it these days. Yeah. Whereas what I really like about the FIRE movement philosophy is that there is intention and thought behind essentially every single dollar. Because like you said right at the start, every dollar spent is a dollar that's not going towards your future retirement, your future FIRE movement.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics such as investing, cash flow, budgeting, saving, passive income, debt management, and much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are, and we are back again with another podcast talking about a pretty exciting topic today.
Andrew, we've actually looked back through the records and through the archives, and it's been, about 100 episodes since we had spoken about this last. So we thought we'd dust it off, do it some justice, shine the light on it again, and away we go. Absolutely.
And I think the last time that we spoke about this was pre-inflation, pre-interest rate rises. And so wasn't, it's always relevant, but wasn't quite as relevant as what it is now. Whereas post all of that stuff, or in the midst of all of that, I think it's a far more relevant topic than it probably ever has been.
Andrew, I reckon that's about enough of a teaser for our listeners and our viewers. So today, what we are talking about again, but once again, that was about 2 years ago. We're talking about the FIRE movement. So this is an acronym that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And this has been gaining momentum. It's been around for a long period of time, but it's been gaining more and more momentum, and it starts to get into the mainstream media. But essentially the premise is that you look at your traditional working life a different way than I guess what's the norm, where you where you work for 40 years, 4 decades, and then you retire. But this is flipping it on its head and actually looking at it slightly differently. Well, not slightly differently, completely differently, and trying to retire as early as possible. Yeah. And at the same time, achieve financial independence as early as possible.
Yeah. And this came off the back of a book. I think they were the first pioneers of it. The book's called Your Money, Your Life, from 1992. Now, as some of you may or may not know, 1992 is a very, very special year, because that's the year that this guy was born. So there were two really great things that happened in that year. But look, I think the main premise of what this book professes, and what people that start to live their life in the FIRE movement, they call it a FIRE movement, is it's an extreme saving and investment philosophy is ultimately what it is, and I don't think that there's any other way to gloss it about. 100%. And really, as Billy was saying, it's designed to bring forward your retirement age as early as humanly possible.
Yeah, and I guess the way, sort of unpacking that a little bit, I guess the way that that this is brought about, really, because if we look at a standard conventional age of 65, I mean, we're talking about people in the FIRE community and who are participating in the FIRE movement, trying to retire in their 30s and early 40s. So in order to do that, they're compressing, obviously, their working years, so it doesn't give them as much time to be able to save up for, I guess, a retirement income stream. So the way that they're achieving financial independence, which then allows them to retire early, is extreme savings. Yeah. So I guess there's a rule of thumb that you attempt to save about 70% of your income, which is a huge, absolutely huge number. We'll unpack a little bit of things in there in terms of, I guess, how is that achieved, and what type of lifestyle you have to have. Yep. And what are the things that you need to sacrifice in order to achieve that? But with that 70% that you are saving, you are investing that and building up an investment to eventually replace your work or your personal exertion income, so you can then hit that retire early and financial independence point of your life.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, this is the main premise of the book is really reducing your expenses. I mean, bringing down your expenses as much as possible. And when I say bringing down your expenses as much as possible, in order to be able to save, 70% of your income or after-tax income, you need to have or run a very, very tight ship around your expenses. Now, this has two sort of benefits when you're talking about bringing down your expenses. So let's say that you manage to wipe out $1,000 a year out of your budget, or your $1,000 a year out of your annual expenses. That $1,000 a year has a twofold effect. One, it's $1,000 a year that you save, but it's also $1,000 a year that you don't need in expenditure when you retire early. So you're kind of having a twofold increase for every expense item that you drop down. Now, most people, especially in this day and age, sort of, talking about 30 odd years or 32 years after the book has come out, for the vast majority of people, 30% of your income is generally going towards your mortgage. So in
the Australian experience, at least,
right.
Yeah. And this was just to add a bit of context, this was an American publisher. Yeah.
Exactly right. And so your ability to save 70% may be tighter, but there are some ways that you can think about it. And I think I've got a really good example, and this doesn't suit everyone's lifestyle, but this is an example of a client of mine. Now, I can't take any of the credit for it because they came to me having already gotten to this stage, but just some other ways to think about not just your expense items, but also your income items, and turning your expense into a potential income. Now, this person, obviously not going to give any names, but she lives a very frugal lifestyle. And one of the ways that she does it, or one of the ways that she limits the expenditure on her mortgage is, so she does have a mortgage, does have a property. In addition to that, she's also got a caravan. Now, she Airbnbs her apartment. It's a 2-bedroom place, and she Airbnbs it as a 1-bedroom, locks a door so that there's a space that, she doesn't need to pack everything away that's personal. Airbnbs that out and lives in the caravan while the apartment is rented out.
Absolutely love it.
Has also recently gotten onto another app where you can effectively Airbnb a caravan. And so there's some sort of app that apparently can stop the Airbnb from rented at the same time as when the caravan is rented, so that she always has somewhere to stay. But effectively, it means that she'll go from, a few days in the caravan and maybe drive to another area and, stay there for a few days, then a few days back at home, and, does it that way. And that's one way to, turn what is otherwise an expense into an income generating asset as well in your, owner occupied mortgage.
I mean, that's a really great example of what we see with people that are participating in the FIRE movement. One of the things, and sort of throwing back to the American example, but we see in some examples, people not necessarily living in a metropolitan city. They might live out in a rural city, or a rural area, I should say, and they're basically producing a lot of the produce to eat and consume off the land. So they might, not have They might not have used, gas in order to heat the place. They might be using the firewood, or they might have some chickens or some animals there that are producing. They might have a vegetable patch. They might not have a vehicle.
Yeah.
And they decide to either catch public transport or walk everywhere. So in order to achieve that number of 70%, you'd have to make some fairly drastic lifestyle changes, I think, unless your income is of such a great amount that 30% is enough to cover it, simply because your income is such a great amount. But realistically, what we're talking about here is some fairly significant lifestyle changes in order to achieve that. So not only is it a financial objective, it's also a lifestyle choice as well too. And the theory behind all of this is that, you make all of these sacrifices today, you live a certain lifestyle today that gives you the financial independence to then stop working at a much earlier time than what you would have ordinarily had. I guess the other thing associated with it is, from that lifestyle perspective, that lifestyle will continue. It's not like you get to,
retire
40, you hit retirement, and all of a sudden your income is going to double or triple. That's not how this works. So it's basically just choosing a specific way to live in order to achieve those things.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think with all of this, I mean, this is quite clearly not something that is right for absolutely everyone. It's probably not right even for, a lot of people, but for the people that it is, it can be a really powerful tool. I mean, you consider, the way that most people think about retirement, and it's that you invest, you put money towards savings, you retire at, 65, or if you've got a good financial advisor, maybe 50 or 55.
With twice the amount of income.
Exactly right. Just a, shameless plug to advisors out there, and to speaking on this podcast. But no, I mean, this is something where, you can do that 15, 20 years early.
Yeah.
It's dramatically earlier. And so what we talk about, and this is the same thing as, anything that that we do when we talk about, money, investing, savings, is make rational decisions. Just because that's the norm and just because that's what, a lot of people do, doesn't necessarily mean that that's right for you. And if living a simpler lifestyle, if, living something that, as Billy said, living off the land, or living in, somewhere that's more rural or outside of metropolitan, and retiring with, a 50-year retirement as opposed to a 20-year retirement is something that's important to you, well, great, then maybe this is an option. And maybe you don't go to the same extreme, that you're saving, 70% of your income, and maybe you're doing it at 50%, and it's, a less extreme example of this. But this can be adapted to, a bit of a more simplistic strategy, so to speak.
Yeah, and the thing that I really like about the philosophy per se, and you hit the nail on the head, Andrew. It's not for everyone. It's a fairly drastic. In today's standards, it's a fairly drastic lifestyle choice. Yeah. But what I do like about it is it's very intentional, and how that ties back to, I guess, what we do for a profession and what we do when we're talking to people about spending with, well, not without the unconscious bias, the unconsciousness that we're seeing, that we spend, you go to the shops and it's just like, yep, tap and go and away. We don't really think about it these days. Yeah. Whereas what I really like about the FIRE movement philosophy is that there is intention and thought behind essentially every single dollar. Because like you said right at the start, every dollar spent is a dollar that's not going towards your future retirement, your future FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. So, I think that's probably the one thing that I like around this, is that the intention is really well thought out. And then there's obviously some discipline, because you need to stick to those numbers and design your lifestyle around it. But that's the one thing that really stands out for me. And I think that's the one thing that we can all take a leaf out of the FIRE movement book, is to pay more attention to our expenditure and be a lot more conscious around it.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, just being conscious around it. I mean, doesn't mean that you need to not spend any money, but just needs to mean that, when you do spend money, you're doing it because there's a reason behind it and there's something that you're getting out of it, rather than just it is what it is.
Yeah. Andrew, let's talk some numbers. So there's a couple of thresholds and a couple of numbers in the FIRE movement that tends to, I guess, stand out and be the rules of thumb. You want to talk us through those?
Yeah. So rules of thumb is really, once you reach, in terms of savings and investment amount. So I'm using savings and investment as interchangeable, because the assumption is that the funds are invested. But once that reaches 30 times your yearly expenses, that's when you look at retiring. So that's the rule of thumb. Now, let's use an example and say, okay, if you've got your expenses down to, $30,000 a year, then you're looking at approximately, or $33,000 a year, then you're looking at, approximately $1 million that you'd need to have in savings or investment in order to be able to retire. And the assumption is that you draw out 3 to 4% of your balance each and every single year. And that's what will ultimately cover your living expenses in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Now, 3 to 4% of, or pulling out 3 to 4% of your assets, assuming that that's invested in, a combination of shares, a combination of managed funds, and maybe some property REITs in there, maybe some bonds, some cash, some fixed income. So a diversified portfolio. If you're looking at historical rates of return, the balance should effectively never diminish. So your balance should pretty much stay where it is. Mm-hmm. You're drawing out essentially, maybe the income side and a little bit of the capital of the portfolio. Yep. And the increase in the portfolio balance, because you're not actually drawing out all of the profits, should cover inflationary increases as well. Yeah. So that's why they say 3 to 4%. Yeah.
So let's just use that as in terms of actual numbers. So if we're at 4% on $1 million, you're talking about $40,000. And then if you're taking out a little bit of principal as well, let's just add, another $10,000 into the mix. So You're talking, say, $50,000 in terms of income per year. Call it $1,000 a week, just because the numbers are easier to sort of wrap our heads around. But thinking about what type of lifestyle you'd need to have in order to be able to live off $1,000 a week probably gives you some good context into what type of lifestyle is attributed with the FIRE movement. Yeah. And we're not saying that the $1 million is it for everyone. Like we said, that's just a rough rule of thumb. But if it's, and I don't want to say this lightly, but if it's only $1,000 a week, and we're probably thinking about it in the context of a metropolitan city.
Yeah, or a couple as well. Like, is this an individual? Is this a couple? Is this a family unit? Are there kids? So you need to, look at your own situation. Maybe, and look, obviously, we're both living in a metropolitan city. For us, that is probably a, extremely modest income in order to be able to retire on the lifestyle that we're currently living. But maybe to give it another perspective and give it another viewpoint is, okay, let's say that you're an individual person and you manage to, individually meet this number. Okay, so fairly, 30, 40 grand a year in $1 million, 30 to 40 grand a year in income might be seemingly quite limited or fairly frugal. Okay, a person that is on, let's say, age pension entitlements. Yep. I know that this is not exact, but let's say you're earning approximately $1,000 a fortnight in full age pension. Yep. That's $26,000 a year. This is more than the age pension entitlement would be. Yeah. And, pensioners are still able to live. Pensioners are, there's a huge amount of pensioners that are living in a metropolitan area. Yeah. So maybe that's just an element of mentality, perspective, and the decisions that you're making. So it's not doable. Yeah. Or I should have just said it is doable rather than give a double negative, but it's definitely a doable number.
Yeah. So in terms of the people who this is, I won't say aimed at, appealing to, I mean, who would we be thinking? Obviously, people that I guess you'd need to be, I shouldn't say you'd need to be young enough and have the foresight to do it, but the earlier you commit to this strategy and this philosophy, the better off your results are going to be.
Yeah. I think so. One, from the result side of things, but two, even from mentality, right? Like you go from expenses being $100,000 a year, and now you want to drop it to 30. It's a big.
It's quite significant. Yeah. Simpler lifestyle. Yeah. I'd say there's a huge amount of discipline required from the person in order to achieve this. Yeah. What else have we got? Probably rural, maybe.
Look. Either you probably need to have either one of two things. You need to be either rural or you need to be comfortable living, in a much smaller property. Yeah. Like the example of a client that I was speaking about before. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in a metropolitan city, but the property price can be lower. Yep. Because there's obviously less of a land size.
Yep. And I dare say, and maybe a little bit controversial, but in a couple, and I only say that is because it's cheaper to live with 2 people than it is with 1. Yeah. That's just the reality of it. So I think being able to achieve the results that you want would be easier if there's two people doing it at the same time. And plus, you keep each other accountable and motivated. And I guess entertainment's probably a big one too, right? Because we spend a lot of money. As a society, we spend a lot of money on entertainment. So if there's someone else doing it with you too, there's free stuff that you can do, I guess, together that would probably be a lot easier to do in a couple as it would be as a person by themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think the other really, sort of big thing with it is where do most people that are, going through the or invested in the F.I.R.E movement, where are they investing their money?
Coming back to this concept of low expenses, the majority of people, really big generalization, but some of the literature that you do read does support this. It's in low-cost style ETF index type of funds. And realistically, that's just a play on, I think the appeal is the low-cost nature, because that comes with the territory when you're talking about the F.I.R.E movement. Plus, above and beyond that, if you're in an index, you're going to get the market return. So I guess there's an assumption that you look at the market return over X amount of period, and then you say, okay, that's our benchmark expected rate of return. If we apply that expected rate of return with the numbers that we've got, our FIRE date, they can predict it with, I won't say a huge degree of accuracy, because it's based on what the markets do, but it gives a really good indication of what to expect at what particular point in time as well.
Yeah, exactly right. I think the takeaway that I or what I take out of this is not necessarily, the full version and adopting something to this degree. And what I think that, and why we bring up this podcast or this topic on the podcast to talk about is, pick the thing that resonates with you out of all of this and adopt it to whatever your lifestyle is. And so, my key takeaway out of this is understanding, okay, what are your expenses, what's important, what's not important, and what can come out of it. But use an aspect of this, like maybe it's not 70%, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 60. Whatever that number is that you're wanting to put away into savings, into investments, into wealth creation, into future retirement planning, which is ultimately what it all leads to. Set an amount, decide on it, rationally, and make sure that you develop or have a strategy in order to be able to put that away on a regular basis as well.
Yeah, that's the appeal and the takeout for me. It's that intentional piece. So whatever it looks like for you, what are the elements that you can take from this? The discipline, set a budget, set a goal, and just stick to it.
Yeah.
And I think if you can apply that part of it, you get the entire benefits of this system without needing to necessarily, if that's your choice, without needing to necessarily to go to the lifestyle extremes that, well, we call it extremes, but to the lifestyle lengths that we see that's attributed to the FIRE movement and the FIRE philosophy.
Yeah. And if it's right for you, do it. I think it's absolutely amazing. I know, I've got only a couple of clients, but I do have a couple of clients that, are adopting this kind of lifestyle, and for them it works and it makes them happy, and, that's absolutely brilliant.
And at the end of the day, that's what everyone's chasing, right?
Yeah. Everyone's chasing, being able to be happy and live life on their terms and not need to worry about money while you're doing it. So whichever way gets you there and whatever's right for you.
That's it.
It's great.
Andrew, well said, well summarised. Thanks for today's podcast.
Thanks a lot, Bills, and thanks to all of our listeners and our viewers. And we look forward to catching you on the next one. If you've got some value out of this podcast, please like and subscribe.
Thanks. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.